So let's talk about a couple of extra points about archery, Normans versus Mongols. Now, when we first started this podcast, somebody said right away that the Mongols would utterly destroy the Normans. They were saying absolutely zero chance against them in battle. They would steamroll them because they actually did indeed engage with cavalry of the European side when they fought the Poles. And that is very true, they did, and they were successful. However, there are a few points about that we want to point out. They fought Emperor Leopold during the time. I'll leave a link below to a video where you guys can have that battle broken down for you. Now, that's true. They did crush them later on in the 13th century on the battlefield. But we're talking about 11th century Normans under the sons of Tancred. Remember, I specifically said this was the Hauteville house, the Tancred brothers, against Genghis Khan and his sons. What if those two clashed? So a question that's often brought up is, did the Normans use mounted archers? And the answer is yes. They had two different types of Norman archers underneath Roger of Sicily and Robert Guiscard when they fought. First of all, they had mercenaries who were mounted archers. They also had Saracens who were mounted archers that they gathered from the enemies they fought. They had other Muslim warriors who fought on horseback and fired their arrows, much like the Mongols did. There were also mounted archers both in William the Conqueror's army and the armies used by the sons of Tancred. Now, they were Norman, but the question that often comes up for debate is, did they actually fire from the position of a horseback? While they were sitting on the horse. They could have used the horse to maneuver to a good position on the battlefield, dismounted, fired, remounted, and rode around to a different spot on the battlefield before firing again. So that question's up for debate. Did they shoot while they were riding? Now, it is possible to fire a bow and arrow from the horseback, a longbow. It's possible to fire a longbow. The thing is that if you're firing a longbow from horseback, most archers would hold the bow in their left hand. You could fire in one direction. It's very hard for you to move over and fire. Like, you could just see me right here trying to. You're not going to get enough draw to fire in that direction. You could swap hands. A lot of archers are good with both hands. I don't know if the Norman archers were. So just with the information we have, if they did fire mounted, they would have to fire in one direction, more than likely. But the question is, the different types of tactics. What's the goal of the mounted archer? Because heavily armored infantry and heavily armored cavalry both can withstand barrages of arrows. If your horses aren't armored, that's more dangerous with the horses. But your heavily armored infantry can withstand arrows for a very long time. During the Battle of Cherami, Roger of Sicily and his men stood up on that hill for hours and hours while thousands of people, even if you don't believe it was 12,000 against 400, I believe that if you position yourself right, that battle is possible to win. But let's just say it was only 1,000. Let's say it was only 1,000 people raining down arrows on them. That is still, in just a span of 1 minute, 6,000 arrows that could have fired upon you. Or, and the Assyrian would probably be firing even faster than that. So thousands of arrows rain down on them. Even if you had 200 guys, you could still get thousands of arrows to rain down on a group of 300 guys in mass. So their infantry and their cavalry could withstand the arrows for a long period of time. That battle alone proves it, because they did before charging down the hill. So yes, they could withstand it from the Assyrians, or from the Saracens, or from the Muslim warriors. They could also withstand the arrows from the Mongols as well. During this period, I understand they had different types of weapons, arrows later on, but that's what they could do. They could withstand it. So the answer is yes, they could withstand it. Now, does that mean they could win the battle? No. But you have to remember that you're not just going to sit there and take on that punishment. You have crossbowmen to fire bolts back. And crossbows did not only fire bolts. You had iron bolts, you had wooden bolts with iron tips, and you also had bullets. There were little chunks of lead and iron, much like the bullets used in a musket, that you could fire back at the enemy. And those were used before the later medieval era. They were also used earlier. And like I said, a lot of people might say, well, the Normans didn't like the crossbow. Well, the Pope banned it much later than the sons of Tancred would be using it. And even though Henry II didn't like crossbowmen that much, and a lot of people started to look at the bow as the cowardly weapon of the battlefield in England, during the time the sons of Tancred, they were much more practical. If weapon is damaged, they were going to use it. They used even the ballista during some of the sieges they were involved in, and so they were not going to shy away from weapons. They also had slingers who would be using slingers in this battlefield, which makes a big difference, because the sling is, first of all, very easy to make and manufacture, and you can pelt down stones or, like I said, lead or iron darts upon your enemy, just like you could bows and arrows. So you have a variety of weapons that you could shoot back at the Mongols with, and the sling is not limited in range, like the same range as the Mongols' bow is going to be. A lot of people debate, would it be that effective? Remember, they had people who would be using the sling all their life on their side, much like the Mongols would be using the bow. You know, if you just handed me a bow, I would not be as effective as a Mongol warrior, but I'm actually very good with the sling. I've been using a sling since I was 6 years old. I've been using a sling, so I would be more effective with a sling than I would a bow and arrow. So you know, you got to look at the region they're pulling these warriors from. So yes, they were going to be able to use their slings effectively. The other point is that what is the purpose of the archer, the mounted archer? The light mounted archer on the Mongol side, his purpose is to wheel around and pelt the enemy with arrows, harass him until the heavy cavalry sees the opening they want and smash into the enemy, which is almost identical to the tactics that the Normans would use over and over again. Robert Guiscard, Roger of Sicily, Tancred of Hauteville, the grandson, not the older Tancred, but the younger Tancred, and Bowman all used similar tactics. They would wait with their cavalry, which was their best weapon, until there was an opening, and they would capitalize on it. They would do the same thing with the crossbow. Now, what I wanted to point out was, I mentioned earlier that the Mongols defeated a force of European warriors in a massive battle, and that is true. They defeated Emperor Leopold. However, there are some details in that battle. I'll leave a link for the full battle below so you guys can watch it. I'm not going to cover the whole battle here. But the crossbowmen dealt severe damage to the Mongol cavalry and actually defeated them in the first engagement. So they could do damage, you know, even with the older weapon 100 years later. So the Tancred guys with their superior experience, I feel, would be able to do deadlier, greater damage. And they were much better military commanders than Leopold was. Watch the video and you'll find out why. So you have guys who are more experienced with the weapon. Like I said, you don't just have the longbow to return fire with. You also have the crossbow, and you also have the sling to return fire with. And like I said, you are also going to have not the longbow. You're also going to have the recurve bow, because the Norman brothers used mounted archers who were who were Eastern style. They had recurve bows, so they had mercenaries who were used to firing these weapons on their side as well. And they also had ballista. You know, they had ballista they would use during sieges, so they could use them against the Mongols as well. Now, yeah, the Mongols would likewise probably do so as well, but I think people are overlooking these guys were much tougher and I think a lot more hardcore than some of the guys that the Mongols faced later on. These were very, very tough warriors. So that's just some things to think about that I wanted to point out, was that not only one, do they have the longbow, they also have the crossbow, they also have the sling, they also have the recurve bow as well on their side. And yes, they can withstand the archers for hours at a time. Can the heavy Mongol cavalry withstand their archers as well? Yes, heavily armored people can withstand arrows. You know, that's what the armor is designed to do. My point is, though, that both sides will be playing the same game. I do think that if this what if battle, if these two come head to head, the Mongol forces under, let's just say, Genghis Khan or one of his sons, who was a great general, and you have Robert on the other side, that would be a wonderful mind matchup to see who was smarter in between the two. But if it's even if it's Roger of Sicily, they probably actually would not engage right away. They would probably keep going back and forth, much like Pompey and Caesar did the first few times people tried to get them to engage in battle. When Pompey did finally fight Caesar, he actually didn't want to fight him then. It was the senators who pushed him to engage the enemy quickly, because they wanted that victory. But he was actually waiting because he knew Caesar was dangerous. And Robert and Roger, they're the boss. You know, there's nobody there to force them to engage the enemy. So I think this would actually be kind of a boring, if it was a battle one-on-one, I think it would be boring for a bit, because both sides would be waiting patiently to find that weakness. And since they're both very good military commanders, it would be hard to find and capitalize on. So that's just some more points on archery and the Normans that I wanted to point out. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, and comment down below who or what you'd like to see on Medieval Mondays next. Spartan out.